Welcome to Roadmap to Retirement. Tune in for financial tips, investment strategies, and smart money moves to supercharge your retirement savings. Alex Neri, CFP, and guests are here to help you build your roadmap to retirement.
Welcome back to the Roadmap to Retirement podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Tim and Seth. Tim, I will let you do your own introduction. Starting with Tim, lead us off.
I am a professor, a psychologist at St. John Fisher. I've been there this is going to be my 25th year coming up. My specialty is helping teams, really focused on team development, improving teamwork, and applied research in organizations. And I'll start, Seth. We are two sides of the similar coin here.
Coin.
Yeah. I am a professor who consults, and Seth, my friend, colleague, co-author, is a consultant who has professed, and I'm the team side and
years, right?
The leadership side.
I'm an organizational consultant. Once upon a time, I worked in corporate America. That was fun and very developmental, and I got my doctorate in 2000 in education with a focus in human resource development, where I did teach for 14 years at two different academic institutions, and that's where Tim and I first created our association. He was my boss, actually, way back when, and I was the difficult employee he had to deal with. But my organizational consulting practice today, now in its 25th year, is really in two areas. One is leadership. So I do a lot of work with executive coaching and 360 feedback and half-day programs, multi-week programs. The other is creating great workplaces characterized by dignity, meaning, and community. So I do a lot of conflict resolution. Topic I think we're going to get into today, meaningful partnership at work and workplace covenants is part of that work, but it's all around culture and how do you create a good, positive, healthy culture that engages people.
Okay, awesome introduction. This is why I let you guys do the introduction, because there's no way I would have done any of that justice other than saying your names and maybe a couple of little things. So today's topic, let me go ahead and plug the book first. Meaningful partnerships at work. We are co-authors here. What I thought we would do is, after reading this, I think there's a lot of connections between how you would have the conversation about making a workplace more healthy and getting everyone on the same page to achieve a goal. I think it relates back directly to how we work with our clients and maybe the relationship that an advisor and a client should have. And I think it would be true to any other professional. So if we're talking to an attorney, a consultant, your CPA, whatever the profession in your life that you're working with, I think a lot of the sort of tips and tricks in this book and framing things in a similar way can be beneficial. So, Tim, if you want to kick us off, what are some similarities that we should maybe start with?
Yeah, let me back up, and I'm actually going to start before that.
Okay, awesome.
And thanks, Alex. Really appreciate being on here. This is, I hope, going to be a fun conversation. You'll hear, Seth, our banter back and forth, which you've already started to hear. We've been doing this a long time. And what I started with talking about, I'm a team development person, and I have a program I do called Tim's Top 10 Tips for Teams, which the Canadian here wants me to call Tim Bits of Wisdom, but it's wagging your finger to some extent. These are the 10 things you should do, and Seth's specialty is leadership. And it's so many books out there that focus on the 5 tips for a leader, the top 10 list, or whatever it is. And they all wag their finger and say, this is what you do to be a better team member. This is what you do to be a better leader, whatever it might be. Very prescriptive. And not that they're not good, because it's all programs, it's great. But what we're going to talk about, this building partnership, is really about what I would say the space in between. And that's why we think it's so relevant to these professional relationships, because that's what we're talking about. Now, our model is a leader and a team. And it's, instead of telling the leader what to do, in the team what to do, it's saying, how do you work together to build that relationship where it moves into something meaningful beyond just people working together, but it becomes a partnership. And we came up with the title. Actually, we had a different title when we first submitted this to the publishers.
That's a whole
and when we were, really interesting. Unfortunately, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg had just died when we're getting ready to finalize a title. And they kept talking about her meaningful life and what she had done, that she had really changed the course for women, and she had set the stage for these other things. And it was amazing tributes to her life, but the word meaningful meant something.
It kept showing up.
It kept showing up, and it meant above and beyond. Take it to the next level. And that's what we're talking about in this book, is this partnership. that it's taken to a second level. And now I'm going to turn it to Seth, because the idea for this, and give credit where credit is due, this came from Seth. He brought me in back in about 2006, and it's been a fun ride. I didn't really know about this, and I saw psychological underpinnings of what he was doing, why at work this would work. So, Seth, why don't you do a quick origin story?
Origin story. Yeah. So the origin story, by the way, is not Darwin or Genesis, but the origin story here is where this idea came from. And it germinated during my 8 years at Xerox. And as manager of organization development, I was doing a lot of work with managers and engineering teams. I was doing empowerment programs and leadership programs and conflict resolution stuff and coaching. But the team building was the fun part. And the company at the time took this process seriously. So I was privileged to work with chief engineers and senior managers and their teams of a dozen people or so, and go off-site to a nice golf club or a nice hotel and do a day program enhancing communication and trust and relationship and such. So doing due diligence, I would meet with the senior manager and ask the questions: what's been going on? What are some challenges? What do you want to use this day for? What would be most helpful to the team? How's your relationship with your staff? And invariably, I got some type of response along the lines of, the team's okay, but I wish they would respond to my emails faster. I wish they were more prepared for ops meetings. I wish they wouldn't complain about sunrise meetings at 6:30 a.m. I wish they would stop bugging me with problems they can fix themselves. I wish. And then I would meet with the team without the manager and ask the same questions. And I always got to the how's it going with your boss? And invariably, the answers were somewhat similar. Our boss is okay, but we wish our boss recognized our achievements and understood that we sometimes have to leave at 4 o'clock and got us the resources we needed and filled the open slots that are hurting our productivity, etc. So I left thinking, why don't these two parties talk to each other? They share a coffee pot, they share bathroom, they share conference rooms, they see each other, they're all co-located. This wasn't in the remote time frame, this was in the 90s. And so I planned these team building sessions around the idea that they would share expectations. What do we expect from each other? Which was a good start. It broke the ice. It got them sharing legitimate work-related, productivity, performance-related expectations and how they could improve on them. Later on, I left the company, Tim and I connected, and the process got further refined. And so we started to add the notion of obligations actually precedes expectations. This may come into our conversation, by the way, because there's a psychological benefit to starting with what do I owe? It puts me in a service mindset. If I start with, well, Tim, what I need from you is this, and what I need from you is that, and what I need from you is this, it's very demanding, arguably self-centered, and it doesn't necessarily engage the conversation to what do I need to do to help him feel supported and successful. So this notion of obligations worked its way into the process, writing stuff down, having them sign it, and structuring the review. So this really became the basis of what we call a workplace covenant, this behavioral contract between two parties, in this case, a manager and a team. And now fast forward, we've done this with hundreds of groups, and whether it's a blue collar environment, we worked with electrical workers who crawl under streets after storms and fix electrical 10,000 volt wires and do this kind of stuff with them. We've done it with presidents and vice presidents of larger organizations. And whether it's healthcare, high tech, finance, government, not-for-profit, name the sector, if you start asking people, what's it like to work with your colleagues? What's it like to work with your boss? What could be better? The floodgates open. It's tell me about your health. I'm sure in lots of ways, positively or negatively, you could go on for half an hour about what's working health-wise for you and maybe what you're struggling with. Even more passionately, everyone has strong feelings about their work. So when we broach this topic of how do we make you feel more supported and be more successful at work, no one has a lack of ideas. They are willing and forthcoming with that. And so this process provides a structure to that. And the output is, of course, this contract between two parties.
And so to tie it back to your initial question, it's about developing, improving, and sustaining professional relationships, improving communication, improving collaboration, improving cohesion. It really is a way to try to get people on the same page. And as Seth said, it's focusing on obligations, flipping it over to a service leader, a service mindset. And so our goal is to improve professional relationships, whether it's our model the leader in the team, which we always talk about in the book, or what I do in my classes, where I break them up into teams and they do a covenant in their teams. In some of my classes, I do a professor to class process where I talk about what are my obligations, what are your expectations of me, what are my obligations to you. They talk about their obligations to me and their expectations of me. And then we merge those lists with 2 signed lists.
I want to underscore what you're saying. There is no relationship unless both sides of that coin are talked about. You cannot have a full, mutually rewarding, mutually satisfying, mutually successful relationship if it's only the exchange of expectations of each other. It has to also include, what do you owe?
I think you got to differentiate from, it's not just a job description where you post an opening, these are the duties that you have to perform, and if you take the job, we expect that to happen. It is something of, and I think you outlined them both nicely, it's a back and forth of not only what do I expect from you, but what do you expect from me, and then let's have an open dialogue about it. And I think you referenced in the book that there tends to be a lot of overlap in those things.
Absolutely.
A lot of the same things that both parties need.
Write it down and sign it, because there's something about signing a commitment that's important. It's not just saying, how many times has, now putting it back in your shoes, how many times has one of your clients said to you, or, and I won't pick on you necessarily, but in a global sense, oh, I'll get that to you tomorrow. It doesn't matter whether it's the financial planning and advising relationship with a client or the leader team. It's we make promises all the time and don't meet them. In fact, we just had some friends in town, and one of his employees had made a commitment to write something, and he was watching his clock and waiting because they had a deadline to go to print. It's really about building these relationships around, how can I help you? What do you need? And improving it with this signed process for what I will do.
Sure.
And that's really a way to hold people accountable. Not in a mean way, not in a nasty way, not in I'm going to fire my client, or but in a way where it says, hey, I know you did really well at these 3 things. Here's a place where I could use more.
Right.
And so I really do think it's the heart of so many positive work relationships, because so many people live in, and we talk about this in the book, this 2-way street of frustration where they're both struggling and they're both frustrated. And again, I'm going to go back to our language. How many times I've been a leader, multiple times, and how many times have I been frustrated because I'm not getting what I need, and I'm sure they have been equally frustrated with me.
Yeah.
And
Stuff is
so
taken for granted. We get this at the beginning. How often every day managers and teams are put together, thrown together, and no discussion is made about how they'll work together.
Well, there's a sense of neither party necessarily chose to work with the other person. It's, I work with this company, and that manager that hired me left, and this other guy gets plugged in, so now I'm forced to work with this team that we all go to work to make money, right? So they're not just going to quit a job simply because they're not on the same page with the rest of the team. So it's, how can we back into having an understanding where I know what you need from me and vice versa? It starts to become the issue.
But this becomes the amazing part, is that they're going to spend a 10-hour day, 5 days a week, whatever number of weeks a year, years on end, and they have not really discussed how they will work together. There's just a lot of assumptions about
not what their duties are, but how their relationship.
So now communication.
Now I'm going to turn it to you. What is one obligation you think somebody in your shoes should have to a client?
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things I was thinking while I was reading this is the difference between the relationships I have with my client versus a team that's maybe all employed by the same person. Is there's a direct, you hear it all the time, like the customer's always right. It's like a thing that you hear, but I think a lot of people disagree with it. And when it comes to communication, there's a lot of times where as an advisor, I'm waiting to get something from the client. It might be a statement from an account that's held elsewhere. It might be a tax return that we need for the tax planning. There's something I need from them in order for me to do my job. And it's easy to sit back as a professional and say, they're paying me, so as long as they're happy, it's fine. But we're missing an opportunity there to have, again, a meaningful partnership with the client. And I think that's a big struggle on my end. Your question was a little bit different. Your question was the opposite of it. So what should I be doing for my client? I think communication is a big part of it. If you're listening to this and you're not hearing from your financial advisor, that's a problem. So your advisor should be communicating to you in a meaningful way. I think a lot of what a good financial advisor does is taking a fairly complex concept and breaking it down into steps that the end client can understand and implement. If I paint a picture of this is exactly what you need to do in your financial lives, but it's all Greek to you, it doesn't make any sense, you can't actually implement it, we're not really doing the best job possible. Meaning, if we're looking for the absolute optimal financial plan, that might not ever be realistic. I made a comparison on another podcast we did talking about the comparison of a healthy diet versus a financial plan. I could sit here and say, these are all the things that you should eat, these are all the things you should never eat, and realistically, most people are not ever going to follow that. And the same is true about a financial plan. If I can get you to do 80% of the right things financially, you're going to come out way further ahead than most of your peers.
Put 10% of your income to savings, et cetera, right?
Little things, but just do those big things. Take care of the big stones in life. And then that other 20%, if you want to, in the diet, obviously you want to have a cheeseburger or ice cream cone, go ahead and do it. If you want to spend money on going out to eat, go ahead and do that. And it'll impact your financial life similarly to the way it will affect your diet.
Right. Yeah, I've actually been thinking a lot about this because we have a financial planner, and I've been thinking about maybe it's time for me to have this conversation, my wife and I, to have this conversation with him. And honestly, spend 5 minutes talking about these exact things because I've realized, and we've been working with him for about 5 years now. At the beginning, he'd ask us for things and I wouldn't deliver. And now I realize he was always very polite and kind about it, but I realized that I wasn't living up to my obligation to him by not delivering. And I've realized that if I want financial health, then it's my job to do that delivery.
Right.
I have to deliver information.
So, just speaking as someone who's had some financial help along the way, there must be different kinds of partners. And the kind of partner you would have as a client who's in their 30s is different than the partner you might have in their 50s or 60s.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the level of responsiveness, the urgency around it, the focus on it, I suspect would change as well. I guess my question to you too is, what do you think of clients who have several advisors? Because I think that can happen too. I don't know that there's a monogamy viewpoint of financial advisement.
It can happen. I would say in my experience, typically we don't allow that to happen. And it's not to say, I guess I'd want to know, Mr. and Mrs. Client, why is it that you have more than one advisor? Is it that you appreciate different viewpoints? Is it that you want certain advice on certain
They got insurance policies or something at some point down the road from somebody?
Yeah. Most people go throughout life and they've got a 401k from one job, they've got a life insurance policy they bought when they had a kid,
right,
a rollover from something else. And they probably have relationships with a lot of different financial firms, but I would argue that they don't truly have one person that's doing a real comprehensive financial planning. That's not all on one page.
How do you make that argument, as it were, or that case for someone who's perhaps got an insurance policy here and a 401k, as you say, different professionals who are involved with their financial life, now they're 45 or 50, what's your case to consolidate?
We have this conversation all the time, and as we get closer to retirement and take this stuff more serious, I would have an honest conversation with the client that's, you need help, you need everything on one page. It might be me, it might not be me, but either way, pick the professional that you feel is going to do the best job to get you where you need to go. There's not value in having things all spread out. It makes it so all the professionals in life can do that much less of a good job for you because they don't understand as much of what you have going on. And we both gained and lost business that way. I've had people who said, hey, thanks for your honesty. I've been working with so-and-so for 20 years. I want to continue doing that. And they move their accounts from us to that person. That's fine. Usually it tends to go the other way where they, again, appreciate the honesty and they see that we're doing things differently and they want to work with us going forward. And there's an opportunity to consolidate things under one platform.
So forgive the question, and I hope I'm not proceeding with my own interest in mind here, but do you also do wills? Do you do the tangential things that go with the financial planning? So do you have a relationship with those providers?
So that's a good question. So a lot of times the financial advisor, we arrogantly like to think of ourselves as like the quarterback of your financial life. So we're conducting the advice around it, and there's a lot of ancillary things that we don't do directly. I'm not an attorney. I don't write wills. I'm not going to necessarily get your insurance in place. There are other professionals. I'm not going to file your taxes.
Contract manager,
Sort of contract
project
manager.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we might meet somebody that's got a great relationship with an attorney already. They wrote a will for him 20 years ago, and it's a matter of updating that will. And if not, we do have, of course, a network of professionals that we have vetted and we trust to refer business to. It's in a sense, when we think about these meaningful teams, in a lot of ways, I have my team here literally in my office, but I also have a team of other professionals that we do things like that with, whether it's the attorneys, the CPAs, whoever it is. We want to try to be on the same page as the other professionals that are influencing our clients' lives.
So thinking about the kind of covenant you might have with clients, what have been, by way of feedback, some of the greatest things you've heard from your clients in the last few years that affirm that what you've delivered has been valuable?
Yeah, I think I talked about this actually on another podcast episode. So for our loyal listeners, it's getting a little bit redundant, but it's really cool to me as an advisor when you're meeting with somebody that I've had an established relationship with for 5 to 10 years. We worked with them with the goal of eventually retiring. Maybe the retirement date was 2024. So now we're there.
Mm-hmm.
And they, in that meeting, it's the last meeting before they officially pull the trigger and decide to retire. And they tend to have an emotional moment of realizing that they can afford to retire, and they might have had something in their past where maybe their parents were never able to afford to retire, and they're the first person in their family to really have that. And they realize what a good financial position they are in, that they can stop going to work on Friday and never come back and still do all these wonderful things they want to do with their retirement.
Yeah, that would be.
So that is a really powerful thing that we get to be part of and get to see. Other than that, I love getting positive feedback when I refer somebody to someone else. If they go meet with that attorney to do the will and they say, hey, so-and-so was really awesome. They helped us with this. Thank you for the referral. I think it's cool to be able to connect people in that way.
Yeah. So you're talking about these relationships. Now we have multiple relationships, not only the relationship between you and your clients, but also you and your other partners inside and outside of this organization. And to me, the most useful thing that anybody could take from this is have the conversation. How do we develop this relationship so we're both getting out of it what we need? What are our expectations? What are our obligations? What are your expectations? What are your obligations?
Can I refine that a little bit?
Go ahead.
I think it's not only what are your expectations, in order to feel in this partnership supported. That word support becomes something that we've really fixated on. And I think I can just speak for myself as a client, feeling that my financial advisor has thought about the insurance, thought about the will, and thought about this investment vehicle or that or all these things, and is in a timely way proactively. For me, the communication would be a big part of it, kind of the routine check-in or the, hey, you missed your monthly deposit, what's going on?
To add another layer to the team framework, one thing that we've also begun doing that I think is helpful to clients is we call it a beneficiary meeting. So as you get older, especially if you've got X amount of dollars to be left to your children, whoever else it is, we want to frame that in a way where the first time your adult child is hearing from us isn't a terrible day where they just lost the parent. So I think bringing those people into the room, and I think it's taboo in a lot of senses that people don't always want to talk to their children about money, or they want to, for whatever reason, keep them in the dark a little bit. I promise you're doing yourself and your kids no favors by keeping them secretive. So a lot of times we'll encourage you, bring your adult children to your next financial planning meeting. Let them understand what you've got going on, how it might affect them down the road, because the reality is this generation that's retiring now is going to have the biggest wealth transfer in the history of the world, going from this baby boomer generation to their kids inheriting money. And how they do it, and it goes back to estate planning and the will and all those things, how they do it does make a difference. And I think having a mature adult conversation with your adult kids can make a big difference. So adding that to our team framework is definitely essential.
You're hitting me personally right now, which feels really good. As are
you getting verklempt?
Yeah, as an adult who's moving towards retirement, as Seth knows, I turned 60 on Sunday, and so and so I'm looking towards what's next. And I have 3 adult kids. My wife and I have 3 adult kids, and we had never thought that we have open conversations with them. We don't hide these things, but we have never thought to bring them in to our conversations. And what a good idea, because they definitely shouldn't be hearing about this on a bad day. The plan should be in place.
I think unfortunately a lot of people maybe in your shoes don't think about it, or if they do think about it because they went through a similar experience with their own parents. We hear this all the time around with the idea of long-term care insurance, those kinds of things. And it seems like people are typically talking to their financial advisor about that need right after they've gone through it with their own parents. So I think if you can be proactive and have this conversation with your kids, figure out a true financial plan, not just a how am I invested, but a what is going to happen when I turn 80 and can't take care of myself. At what point do I want to get my kids involved? Who's my power of attorney? Or my kids eventually going to be making these decisions anyway. So if they know more about it before the attorney calls and says, hey, your father isn't in a condition to make these decisions anymore. We need you to make this decision.
Well, this is the joke I always say, be nice to your kids because they pick the nursing home.
Yeah.
Yes. I've been making that joke for a long time.
Yeah. You mentioned about boomer transfer of wealth and the new generation, and people of a certain age are having a lot harder time buying houses. To buy a house now in Rochester, we're somewhat blessed with a relatively, compared to the rest of the country and elsewhere, affordable real estate market. But go outside this little bubble and you go to, I don't know, New York City area, Chicago area, LA area, certainly Toronto, Montreal. These are cities where you're looking at $1.5 million to buy something very modest. And so it raises the whole financial question. You're talking about what happens when we're infirm and ready to go. What about helping the kids now?
Yeah.
What about that whole financial conversation of, I have two very prominent examples in my family, and I'll just share them quickly. My late uncle, may he rest in peace, had this notion of, I'll live a frugal life. It'll all go to my 2 kids when I die. He made some huge financial mistakes that actually cut his wealth by about a third, which was really too bad. But when his kids could have used the help buying in the greater Toronto area, they didn't get a penny. He passed away, and then there was a state tie-up and all that stuff. They finally got something, but it wasn't in a timely way. Other members of the family have been able to give while still, it's the old pig and cow thing, do you give while you're alive or do you give when you're dead? And I think there's an interesting conversation to have around timely help to your children, particularly around house. And certainly grad school and other things.
Would you rather be alive to see your kids enjoy the money, or just know that they're going to get some large sum of money when you're not there? We have conversations with a lot of retirees who they're people that live a modest lifestyle. They saved a lot of money throughout their working years, and they get to the retirement phase, they've almost oversaved. They have more money than they really need. So because they've been brought up in such a frugal way, and that's what's ingrained into them, it's hard to say, hey, let's spend an extra month. That's a really hard thing for them to do mentally, because they have this guilt associated with spending. And I think that oftentimes the solution is, okay, if you don't want to spend this money on yourself, if you don't have an interest in taking that vacation or getting that new car, whatever it is, would you feel good knowing that you're helping your son or daughter buy their first house? Would you feel good knowing that you're helping pay for your grandkids' college?
There's probably tax benefits to doing that too, I'm sure.
Certainly are.
Yeah, the capital gains stuff and other.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a lot of things you do through gifting, and all that feeds back into your estate plan with smart.
My brother is transferring ownership of a property he has, his 25% interest in it, to his 27-year-old daughter now, to avoid tax implications and capital gains issues later. He's doing that way ahead of hopefully his demise.
You always like to think you have a lot of time, so you always have a lot of time. You never know.
Yeah.
Very cool. We're getting to the end of our time here, but I want to make sure that we touched everything that we hope to touch on today. Is there anything else that either of you want to make sure we fit in here?
To me, to sum it up, it's have these conversations.
Right.
It's we so often avoid, and in fact, Seth and I were talking about this unrelated on our drive here today about avoiding conversations. And that's so hard to have some of these difficult conversations. So have the conversations about how we can support one another so that we can be successful only lead to a better relationship. Otherwise, you're going to end up finding out about it too late, being angry, being frustrated, and we want to avoid that two-way street of frustration. Get people singing from the same song, blind, on the page together, and as we use in the book, rowing together smoothly towards a goal.
I could see clients needing time to think about it. I think it's something you plan perhaps at an early meeting and then come back to later. Come back with a written list. What can I most do for you as a client to help you feel supported and be successful, so we can get to the goals we discussed in our first meeting?
Yeah.
What do you most need from me? I'll bring a list where here's what I think I need to do for you. You vet that list and take a look and tell me where I'm off and where it makes sense. And at least this way we have a framework for our advisor-client relationship.
Yeah, I think that's, as a professional, I think that's something I can steal and do better, is maybe setting expectations of, we can have a okay relationship with me just doing the obvious obligations. Or if you really want to have an awesome relationship, these are the 5 things I need you to be all over. It might be communication, providing information, really base level stuff. And the client can buy in from day one. I think it'll make it.
I think if you position that as the best working relationships I've had with clients have been where I did this and they did that.
Yeah.
And then they were 10 out of 10 satisfied and I was 10 out of 10 satisfied to be able to help them.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So
I'm going to take that.
here's the gold standard for what has worked well in this situation before, instead of making assumptions where we're going to just talk past each other or miss commitments.
Thank you both for being here. It's been the Romance Recovery Podcast. Thank you both. If you haven't checked it out yet, please check out the book, Meaningful Partnership at Work.
Thanks so much, Alex.
Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security, or engage in any specific trading strategy. Results will vary. Past performance is no indication of future results or success. Market conditions change continuously. This commentary reflects the personal opinions, viewpoints, and analyses of Alexander Neri. It does not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, their clients, or their employees. This commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by Alexander Neri or RFG Advisory, or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change at any time without notice. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, a registered investment advisor. Alexander Neri and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place.